Hey there friends, Andrea Walford here from Make Beautiful Cards. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create this happy birthday card featuring Stampin' Up's Butterfly Bijou 6x6 Designer Series paper and the Pretty Perennials stamp set. So the first thing that we need to do is to prep our butterflies. And I'm going to be using this pattern paper sheet that you see here from the Butterfly Bijou 6x6 Designer Series paper pack. Now there's two ways that you can cut out your butterflies. You can do it by hand using scissors like you see here. And if you're going to do that, then I suggest you watch my YouTube video, How to Fussy Cut Like a Pro, because it shares all sorts of tips and tricks for getting great results with your fussy cutting. Your other option, if you like to do a lot of fussy cutting like I do, is to use a machine like the Brother Scan & Cut. And this is a machine that I recently invested in because I do a huge amount of fussy cutting on my cards, and I have for years. So it just made sense for me to take the next step and invest in the machine. Now, because I have the machine to do the cutting for me, like it can cut out all the butterflies on this sheet in about a minute. In terms of setting up the machine, it maybe takes me 2 to 3 minutes total from start to finish. So because of that, I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to cut out all the whole butterflies on each pattern paper sheet here. So you can see here, there's 6 butterflies that I can cut out. And then that way I just set them aside and I can use them in making a whole bunch of cards. And I don't have to do this step every single time I want to sit down and make a card. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to cut these out, and then once I've done that, I'll be back to show you what they look like. I'm back from my cutting machine, and you can see here all my butterflies have been cut out. So the butterflies I'm going to be using for this card are a blue butterfly, one of these kind of yellowy orange butterflies, and a pink butterfly. Next, I'm going to prep my happy greeting. So I'm going to be using the Pretty Perennials stamp set, and I'm going to be using this greeting that says happy. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp it onto black cardstock using Whisper White craft ink, and then I'm going to heat emboss it using white embossing powder. Now, what I like to do is, because I'm planning on making a lot of cards using this happy greeting, I like to save myself some time by stamping, embossing, and cutting a bunch of these images out at the same time. So I'm just going to show you how I do that. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my embossing powder tool. So I'm then going to take my embossing powder tool and I'm going to rub it all over my cardstock piece. Now I can only stamp a certain number of greetings at the same time and emboss them. I can't actually do the entire sheet simply because I don't want the ink to dry before I'm able to stick the embossing powder. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work as quickly as I can, and I'm going to stamp 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see if I can get away with stamping 6, 5, 6. And I'm going to place this over a coffee filter, and I'm going to sprinkle on embossing powder. So let's start with the right hand side first, and then I'll slide this over and we'll do the left hand side. And then I'm carefully going to flick the back, and you can see if you do a good job applying your embossing powder tool all over, then you'll have minimal flecks to clean up afterwards. So here you can see I was able to go ahead and stamp 6 of these. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my heat tool and I'm going to heat emboss all of them. So here you can see what my heat embossed pieces look like. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim off my excess cardstock here. And I'm going to go ahead and cut these out. Now, up until recently, I would have cut these out using my paper snips, and I would have done it by hand. And if you're fussy cutting by hand, then I recommend you watch my How to Fussy Cut Like a Pro video on YouTube, because it shares some tips and tricks for getting great results with fussy cutting. Now recently, I treated myself to a Brother Scan & Cut it's an electronic cutting machine, and it will actually cut these out for me, leaving a nice small border around it. So it makes cutting out lots of these images really quick, which is why I've actually gone ahead and stamped so many of them. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to cut these out, and then I'll come back and show you what it looks like. So here you can see what all my die cut pieces look like. So I'm going to set aside the one that I'm going to be using for this card, and then I'll put the others aside for other projects that I will be creating. So I'm now going to prepare the greeting that I'm going to be pairing with the word happy. Once again, I'm using the Pretty Perennials stamp set, and I'm going to stamp 3 greetings because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm prepping for a bunch of different cards, so I figured I might as well stamp them all at once, and I'll show you how I do that. So I'm going to be using the greeting birthday, for you, and you make me. So my strip of black cardstock is secured to my grid paper using a repositionable adhesive just so it doesn't shift as I'm stamping. I'm taking my embossing powder tool, I'm patting it liberally all over my cardstock piece, and then once you've done that, you don't want to touch your cardstock anymore. So I'm now going to grab my white craft ink pad and my greetings. So I'm trying to align them fairly close to the bottom of my cardstock piece. So I've stamped the greeting birthday twice, I've stamped the for you twice, and the you make me. So now I'm going to grab my coffee filter, and I'm going to sprinkle on embossing powder on all my greetings. So there you can see how that looks. Now it looks like one of my for you has a lot of embossing powder. It's going to be challenging to clean that off. So what I'm going to do is I'm very quickly going to stamp another for you and maybe another birthday. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to emboss all of those. Now if you do have any stray flecks of embossing powder, you can try to get rid of them with a little paintbrush, but that should be good. So I'm going to heat emboss these now, and I will be back to show you what it looks like when they're done. So here you can see what all my greetings look like. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this apart. So I'm going to place it on my guillotine style trimmer, and I want to cut it right down the middle of this piece. And then I'm going to trim each individual word separately. Then what I like to do before I actually start the trimming process is I like to just cut them apart. So once you have all your pieces cut apart, you can then start trimming them. Now to help me get an even straight trim around, I always use my little guillotine trimmer. This Tonic Studios one, this small size one, is a great size for this. And I use the edge of the plastic guide to help me figure out where I'm going to cut. So what I make sure is that my letters, I can just see the very tip of my letters past the edge of the plastic guide. So I start with the side usually. So I align the top edge of my strip onto or with one of the lines on my platform. Then I make sure the letter is either just aligned with that plastic, with the edge of that plastic guide, or sticking out slightly. It's a little bit fidgety, of course, because the paper ends up pretty much being completely covered by the plastic guide. But I always get great results doing it like this. So I'll do the sides first, then I'll flip this. Now just the one trick when you're doing this, in addition to using your plastic guide to align it, is that the paper can slip easily. So you really want to make sure that you're holding on to the plastic guide just on top of where the paper is. And of course you keep your fingers out of the way of the blade. So there you can see I have a perfectly trimmed greeting. So now I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to trim the rest of my greetings, and then I'll be back to show you what they look like. So here you can see I've trimmed all my greetings, and I discarded the ones that didn't have a nice clean stamped impression. So now the greeting that I'm going to be using for this card is this birthday greeting. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece of Granny Apple Green cardstock and some of my double-sided adhesive. So I've cut this adhesive sheet so that it's 4 1/4 inches wide. And I'm folding back the protective backing. And then I'm just going to align it with the top of my cardstock piece. And then I'm going to stick it down. And you can see the cardstock piece is, the backing is in segments. So I'm peeling back each segment as I stick down the adhesive. Now for this last segment, because my adhesive sheet is a little bit longer than my cardstock, I'm not peeling it all the way. You can see here, I'm basically going to flip it back, and then I'm just going to trim this. And I'll save this little piece for another project. And then here, this little bit of overhanging edge, I'm also cutting that because I find that it'll stick to my cutting plates if I don't. So now I'm going to be using my dies. This is the Pierced Blooms dies. And the Pierced Blooms dies have 2 of these leaf stems. And I want to die cut 2 sets of these. And then they also have this little leaf that you see here, and I'm also going to die cut these. So of these leaf stems, I'm going to die cut 4 in total, so 2 sets of 2. And then these ones, I think for my card I only used 2, but I think I might go ahead and cut 2 sets, or 3 maybe. I'm going to go ahead and cut 2 sets of 2, just so I have an extra in case I need it. So once I've cut those, I'll be back. So I'm back from my die cutting machine, and you can see I have all my pieces cut. So now I'm going to take my note card. It's a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card, and I'm going to start sticking these pieces down. So I'm going to stick one piece there, one piece kind of this way, one piece down this way, and then one piece kind of angled up this way, like so. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the backing. You have to be very careful as you're doing this because the stem is very delicate. And then I'm aligning the edge, so I don't really want it overlapping. So I'm just aligning it like so. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stick down the remaining leaves in the positions that you see them, that I have them laid out. So there you can see how that looks. So now let's go ahead and start placing our pieces. So my butterfly, my pink butterfly, I'm going to want to stick him up like so. But you can see here I don't have a lot of leaves sticking out there, and that's why I cut these little pieces here, because I wanted to be able to add some additional greenery sticking out beyond the butterfly. So I want that to be kind of like that. Oops. So let's go ahead and remove the backing like that. And then let's go ahead and I'm going to put some Stampin' Dimensionals at the back of this butterfly and stick him down. And then I want this butterfly angled in such a way that he's covering as much of that stem as I can, but not really overhanging the edge of my card. So there you can see how that looks. Now my orange butterfly, I'm going to be sticking on an angle like this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to place one set of leaves here so we can see some greenery. And then this leaf, or set of 2 leaves here, I'm going to stick slightly under this leaf like so. So now, before I go ahead and stick the other 2 butterflies down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to place some Stampin' Dimensionals at the back of my happy. So I'm placing some at the back of each of the big letters. So wherever I know it's going to be hidden. But then I like to cut just a very thin strip of the edge. And I'm going to cut that in 2 pieces so that I can stick that behind the tail of the P, both P's in the word happy. And notice I'm using black dimensional foam so that it's not visible from the side behind the letters. So I'm removing the backing, and I may put just a little piece behind the tails as well, but I'll have to cut it a little bit thinner. Now we can go ahead and stick down the word happy. So I'm just going to place my butterfly approximately where I want him to be. There we go. Make sure that's straight. We're going to go ahead and stick this last branch down. Like so. This little butterfly, I'm going to place a couple of Stampin' Dimensionals at the back. And then I'm going to stick this one on an angle as well. And then finally, I'm going to stick this butterfly down like so with some liquid glue. So this one I'm not going to be putting any dimensional foam. Now I didn't press down firmly on the dimensional foam of the word happy because you can see I need to tuck the wing underneath the letter Y, like so. And then I'm going to grab the word birthday. And I'm going to tuck it just underneath like so. So there you go. So now all we have to do is add some rhinestones. So I'm going to take a large rhinestone and I'm going to tuck it up in here. I'm going to take a small rhinestone, place it over here, and then I'm going to scatter rhinestones kind of amongst the greenery. So I'm going to place one here. Run there, and then I'm placing my last rhinestone up here at the top. So there you have it, friends. You can see what our card looks like, and it's now finished.